I never imagined dialing 911 would end with electricity ripping through my body. However, that is exactly what transpired. The night it began, I wasn't wearing a white coat. I wasn't standing in a sterile room surrounded by beeping monitors. I was standing barefoot on my own porch, clutching a phone like it was the last rope keeping me from falling into the abyss. A few houses down, my neighbor had gone down. I acted, not even thought. Instinct. When I took my oath to become a doctor, it was more than just a promise to the hospital. I carried this vow with me everywhere. My voice cracked as I spoke to the dispatcher, adrenaline twisting my words. "He's not breathing right. Chest pains. Send someone fast." I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a heavy drum drowning out every other sound. The dispatcher's tone was flat, almost robotic. "Stay calm, sir. Help is on the way." Remain calm. Those two words felt like a cruel joke. Calm was impossible when I could already picture a man's life slipping away just a few doors down. I paced, back and forth, across the wooden boards of my porch. Each second felt like a stone was tying itself around my neck and pulling me deeper into the thick, warm, and suffocating night air. Quick pause before we dive deeper. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Finally, headlights. Relief hit me like oxygen after drowning. But when the vehicles pulled up, my breath froze in my throat. There was no ambulance there. It wasn't even a patrol car. Two black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of my house, engines rumbling low like a threat. The doors opened in perfect unison, and out stepped shadows I recognized immediately. The HOA, not the friendly kind, if such a thing even existed. These were the self-proclaimed watchdogs of the neighborhood, men who lived for fines, citations, and confrontation. The same people who complained that my driveway light was too bright, or left letters on my door about unsanctioned medical equipment when I stored oxygen tanks in my garage. And now they stood between me and the help I had begged for. "Step back from the street," one of them barked, his flashlight cutting across my face like an interrogation lamp. I raised my hands, phone still gripped tight. I contacted 911. "My neighbor is having a medical emergency. Allow the ambulance to pass." But they didn't let anything through. They advanced, their expressions stone, their postures rigid with self-importance. In that moment, something cold settled in my chest. I realized this wasn't about safety or order. Control was at issue here. The HOA had found their stage, and I was the villain in their little play. I could already hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, the only thread of hope in that suffocating darkness. But every step they took toward me made the sound feel further away. One said, "Sir, you're out of control." "Out of whack?" My voice broke, equal parts rage and disbelief. "I'm trying to save someone's life." Then I saw it. A metal flash in the flashlight's beam. The distinctive silhouette, a stun gun. Time slowed. For a split second, I thought he wouldn't dare. Surely he wouldn't fire at a doctor, a man standing on his own property, waiting for paramedics. But hesitation is a luxury you don't get when the other man already has his finger on the trigger. The crack came, sharp, cruel, final. A wire hissed through the air, latching onto me like the fangs of some invisible serpent. And then, agony. My world shattered in a single current of electricity. My muscles betrayed me, convulsing violently. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even scream without it sounding like a stranger's voice clawing out of my throat. I hit the pavement hard, skin scraping, head spinning, body locked in a storm I couldn't escape. I saw flashes of light, of faces, of my own helplessness reflected in the black windows of those SUVs. Above me, their voices cut through the ringing in my ears. Calm, calculated, mocking. He was resisting. He was unstable. He brought this on himself. Lies, fabricated in real time. They didn't see me as a doctor or even as a man. I was just another issue to eliminate. The sirens grew louder now, closer, until blue and red lights painted the houses. The real responders had finally arrived, but I was already on the ground, wrists cuffed behind me, my body trembling from aftershocks, my dignity scattered like broken glass across the asphalt. And as I lay there, staring up at the indifferent stars, one thought seared itself into my mind. I was the one who called for help. I had also become the suspect in some way. As soon as those black SUVs came to a stop, I knew something was wrong. I'd called for help, for professionals, for people trained to save lives. Instead, I got them. The HOA. Not the friendly neighborhood kind, if there even is such a thing. No, these were the enforcers, the self-proclaimed gatekeepers of order. Additionally, they were now entering my property as though they owned it. I thought it was a mistake at first. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they heard the sirens and came to see what was happening. But the way they walked, flashlights, blinding, voices raised, shoulders squared like soldiers, told me this wasn't curiosity, this was control. "Step back from the street!" one of them barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the night. I squinted against the beam of his flashlight. "I called 911. My neighbor is in medical distress. I'm waiting for the ambulance. Don't block them." But instead of stepping aside, they spread out, forming a line across the road like a barricade. My heart dropped. The sirens were still distant, but I could already imagine the ambulance slowing, confused, delayed. Seconds mattered, and these men were stealing them. One of them, taller, broader, with a badge that wasn't police but sure looked like he wanted it to be, took a step closer. "You're agitated," he said flatly, like he was diagnosing me with a disease. Agitated? My fists tightened around my phone. "I'm a doctor. A man is fighting for his life right now. I'm trying to help." But they weren't listening. They weren't here for the neighbor, or for me. They were here for themselves. The second man joined in, his tone smug, rehearsed. "We've had complaints, violations, disturbances, and noise. This is an ongoing issue." My stomach turned. This wasn't about tonight. It was about months of petty clashes. Letters slipped under my door, fines for my porch light, warnings about parking too close to the curb. All the ways they tried to remind me, we control this neighborhood, not you. They had discovered the ideal justification to exercise authority now that they were in the midst of an emergency. "Show us some ID," one demanded. "We must verify that you belong here." I almost laughed. Belong here? I had lived here longer than any of them had. I delivered babies in this town, stitched wounds in the middle of the night, held families' hands when hope was gone. I belonged here more than their paperwork ever could. I yelled, "I'm not showing you anything. I'm on my property and I made the call. If you don't step aside, you're obstructing emergency services." Their faces hardened. I could see it, the switch flipping in their minds. I wasn't a doctor anymore. I wasn't even a neighbor. I was a problem, and problems had to be neutralized. The tall one leaned closer, his shadow swallowing mine. "Take care in how you speak. You're escalating this." Escalating? The word burned in my chest. They were the ones with raised voices, square bodies, and flashlights in my eyes. I was the one begging them to move so an ambulance could save a man's life. However, it didn't matter. I could feel the narrative slipping from my hands. In their eyes, I was already guilty. Of what? I didn't even know. In spite of this, I refused to be silenced and moved forward. "Listen to me. I'm a doctor. I made the call. A person is dying right next to you. If you keep standing there, you're not just harassing me, you're endangering him." For a moment, just a sliver of a moment, I thought I saw hesitation. The younger one glanced at the other, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. However, it was crushed by the leader with a single sneer. "He's unstable," the tall man muttered, not to me, but to his partner. Loud enough for me to hear, soft enough to sound like an observation. Planting the seed, framing the story. Unstable. The word echoed like a verdict. I felt the tension coil tighter. The street was no longer a street. It was a stage. Additionally, I was the antagonistic character they had selected. They twisted into an aggressive performance with every word and move I said. The sirens were louder now, so close I could almost feel the pulse of their wail. Relief brushed against me, but it was laced with fear. Because I was aware that the HOA was not finished. Not yet. One of them removed his radio from his belt and exaggeratedly spoke into it. "We've got a hostile male, agitated, possibly under the influence of." I froze. My mouth became dry. They were writing my story before I could even live it, laying the groundwork for what came next. And in that moment I realized something that chilled me more than the night air ever could. This wasn't going to end with reason. It wasn't going to end with words. It happened faster than thought, faster than breath, and it was going to end violently. I was shouting at them to move aside for the ambulance while standing in my driveway with my heart racing. The next, the world tilted, cracked, and burned. I saw the device before I truly believed it. A glint in the light. The outline stood out clearly. A stun gun. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a bluff. No one would be reckless enough to use that on a man calling for emergency help. Not now, not right now. But the way his hand tightened around the grip told me everything. He wasn't holding it to make me feel scared. He was holding it to fire. With a desperate voice and palms out, I raised my hands. "Stop, you shouldn't dare," the crack cut me off. I will never forget the sharp, metallic, violent sound. The wires hissed through the air like serpents and sank into my chest. Then came the current. I was overcome with agony. 1,000 needles driving into every nerve. My muscles clenched so hard I thought my bones would snap. My vision split into shards of light, each of which flickered more quickly than the others. I tried to scream, but the sound that escaped me was strangled. Foreign, not even human. I fell over. Hard. The pavement tore into my skin, cold and unyielding. My body wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the electricity tearing through me, jerking me like a puppet. Every convulsion slammed my head, my arms, my legs against the ground. I saw their faces amid the chaos, calm, detached. One of them actually smirked. The other murmured the words that I would recall for weeks to come. He was resisting. Resisting. I was on the ground, helpless, twitching under their current. And still, they framed me as the aggressor. The world narrowed. They stood tall above me like they had conquered something as my vision narrowed to nothing but silhouettes, as if it were a victory. When the current finally stopped, I was left gasping, chest heaving, every nerve raw and shaking. My arms refused to obey me. My legs began to shake uncontrollably. But I still tried to rise. Stubbornness born of years in emergency rooms where giving up meant someone died. I was pinned to the ground by a boot pressing down on my shoulder. "Stay down," the tall one ordered. His voice was steady, like he had rehearsed it, like he had previously said those words. I called, "For help!" I rasped, each syllable scraping my throat. "Yeah," he muttered, leaning harder, "and look what you caused." The sirens were now so close that they rattled the windows and were so loud. Blue and red lights splashed across the neighborhood, washing everything in chaotic color. The real responders had arrived. But what would they see? A doctor in need of assistance, or a man who was lying on the ground shaking, bound, and portrayed as violent by the voices that had arrived first. The handcuffs clicked cold and final around my wrists, steel-piercing, already swollen skin. I lay there with my face pressed against the ground, looking at the curb where I had just stood waiting for help and tasting the dirt and blood. I considered the neighbor whose death had sparked all of this and the man I had called 911 for. Was he still breathing? Was the ambulance too late? Did my call even matter anymore? I was crushed more by that thought than by the knee on my back. And yet, even in that moment of utter helplessness, another thought flickered. A tiny, steadfast ember in the midst of the chaos. This is not over. Because what they didn't know was that I wasn't just a victim. I was a physician. I knew how to document injuries, how to record timelines, how to speak with precision that courts couldn't ignore. And I knew one more thing. Power like theirs only lasts if no one fights back. They thought the taser was the end. However, it was only the beginning. The world did not completely recover. It returned in fragments. Sounds first, then light, then pain. I remember the hum of the ambulance engine idling, the strobe of red and blue lights flickering across houses, the quick, effective, and detached crunch of boots moving around me. Then the pain. I was reminded of the electricity that had ripped me apart just a few minutes earlier, by the deep throbbing pain radiating from each and every muscle. I should have felt relief when the real responders arrived. Instead, I felt small, humiliated, handcuffed on the ground like a criminal, while the very men who assaulted me stood tall, feeding their version of the story into waiting ears. Unstable, I heard one say. Another person added, hostile. He refused. They were erecting a coffin around me with each word. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my tongue heavy, my words slurred, tangled, and when I finally forced something out, it sounded more like a plea than a defense. I dialed 911. I'm the one who called. One of the paramedics crouched beside me, flashlight in hand. His expression flickered. Pity, maybe, or confusion. But he didn't argue with them. He looked into my eyes as he checked my pulse and murmured, "He's tacky. Get him loaded." Loaded. Like cargo. They lifted me onto the stretcher, my body trembling with every shift. The straps dug into my arms, pressing against the cuffs that still clamped my wrists. I wanted to scream at them to stop, to see, to understand what had just happened. However, the words vanished as soon as I spoke them. Inside the ambulance, the air was sterile, cold, humming with machines. As he checked the patient's vitals, the paramedic avoided my eyes. I learned everything from his silence. He was not here to inquire. He was here to stabilize me, patch me up, and pass me along like a file in a cabinet. I stared at the ceiling, fluorescent light burning into my vision, and for the first time that night, the weight of it all hit me. The betrayal as well as the suffering and humiliation. I had called for help. I had trusted the system to respond, and instead, the people who showed up first had turned me into the threat. The ride to the hospital felt endless, yet somehow too short. My body was shocked by each bump, which brought me back to the moment of impact, the current, and the collapse. It replayed in agonizing detail behind my eyes, and I was unable to escape it. At the ER, I wasn't admitted as a doctor. I wasn't greeted as a colleague. I was wheeled in as a suspect under restraint. The cuffs only came off when the admitting nurse demanded it for treatment. Even then, the marks they left behind were proof of the night I could no longer control. Tests, questions, and the sterile click of machines blurred the hours. My body ached, my mind spiraled. I was also accompanied by whispers throughout, staff glancing at the chart, then at me, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What did he do? By morning, the story had already spread. Neighbors murmured. The phones rang. A headline flickered on a local site. HOA members subdue aggressive resident during 911 incident. Resident who is violent. That was me. The narrative was set before I could even stand on my own feet. Their version of the truth raced ahead like wildfire, while mine was still trapped inside the walls of my skull, lying in that hospital bed. Bruised, humiliated, and silenced, I felt something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also anger, a fire I hadn't felt in a long time. They thought they had ended the story with a taser. They believed that I would die from humiliation and handcuffs alone, but they had underestimated me. Because I wasn't just their neighbor, I wasn't just a victim. I was a physician. I also knew how to respond. Justice does not come in sirens. It arrives quietly. Through paperwork, subpoenas, and the arduous process of an investigation, it creeps in. And when it finally shows up, it doesn't ask permission. I was in limbo for weeks following the assault. My body healed slower than my pride. The burns from the taser leaving angry welts across my chest. But the real scars were invisible. Nightmares that jolted me awake, whispers of neighbors who still believed the HOA's lies, the crushing silence of colleagues who didn't know what to say. I thought the system had forgotten me, that the story was already set in stone. Aggressive resident neutralized by brave HOA. However, one day the phone rang. A voice introduced itself as a federal investigator. Calm, professional, precise. They didn't call to ask me questions. Rather, they called to warn me, "We've opened a case." At first, I couldn't believe it. I had been ensnared in the HOA's narrative for so long that it seemed impossible for anyone to peel back the layers. But as the weeks went by, I watched it slowly, methodically, and relentlessly unfold. Doors were contacted by agents. The neighbors were questioned. Camera footage was seized from doorbells and security systems. Every word the HOA had spoken that night was dissected, compared, exposed. And for the first time since that electric current ripped through me, I felt something stronger than anger. I was hopeful. It was like thunder cracking the sky wide open when the charges landed. Civil rights violations, inaccessibility to emergency services, assault. The very words they had used against me, unstable, hostile, resistant, crumbled under the weight of evidence. Officers' body cam footage, recordings from neighbors' phones, and inconsistent timelines, their narrative gave way like a sand-filled house. And then came the lawsuit. $5 million in cash. It wasn't about the number. The humiliation, pain, and nights when I awoke drenched in sweat and relived the moment of collapse could not be erased by money. But that figure spoke in a language the HOA finally understood: power. For years they had wielded fines and fees like weapons. The balance changed now. They lost control of the stage, and the courtroom became it. No flashlights, no radios, no neighbors to intimidate, merely sworn testimony, tangible evidence, and the unadulterated truth. As I watched them squirm under questioning, I sat there with my suit on and steady hands. Their confidence eroded with each contradiction, each clip of footage that showed me standing calm, pleading, desperate, not hostile. Not a problem, just a man trying to save a life. And when the prosecutor held up the taser, wires dangling like the fangs of a predator, I saw their faces pale. For once they weren't in charge. The headlines were altered. The whispers changed. HOA faces federal charges after tasing local doctor during 911 call. Doctor files $5 million lawsuit against neighborhood association. As I left that courthouse, I encountered a wall of cameras. Microphones pointed in my direction and voices calling my name. Weeks earlier, I had been the villain. I was the one to survive now, the man who fought back. But I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't victory. Not yet. Arrogance prevented my neighbor from waiting for an ambulance, and he had nearly died. My body still bore the marks of electricity. My reputation was still bruised. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of accountability. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The HOA had picked the wrong man to break. The fight didn't end in the courtroom. In reality, such conflicts never end. They echo in policy meetings, in neighborhood gatherings, in whispered conversations between those too afraid to speak up. I walked away from the courthouse with the cameras behind me and the microphones fading into static. But as the doors shut and the echo of my shoes filled the marble hall, I realized something. This story was never just about me. It was about everyone who has ever been bullied by people who think they are in charge, about every family that's been silenced by boards, committees, and associations that forget they were created to serve, not to dominate. Yes, the HO faces charges. Yes, a $5 million lawsuit stands as a warning that justice has teeth. But scars don't vanish with settlements. With verdicts, trust does not repair itself, and lives lost to delay, to arrogance, to unchecked authority, they never return. Even now, I can still hear the faint crackle of the taser. I can still see the panic in my neighbor's eyes as seconds slipped by while I lay on the ground, helpless. It haunts me to hear his labored breathing, and to wonder if the ambulance would arrive on time. And maybe it should, because comfort breeds complacency, and complacency allows systems like this to thrive. I'm a doctor. My oath is to save lives. I tried that night, and for that I was punished. But the punishment didn't break me. It woke me. If you're hearing my story, let it do the same for you. Don't wait until your yard lights are flashing. Don't wait until a title, HOA president, security officer, board member, becomes a shield for abuse. Stand up. Speak out. Document. Question. Even if it's inconvenient, protect the weak, especially when it's dangerous. Because silence is complicity. The HOA thought they could rewrite the narrative, frame me as a threat, bury me beneath lies. But truth has a way of clawing to the surface, gasping for air until it can no longer be ignored. And here's my truth. Nobody is above taking responsibility. Not me, not you. Not the organizations that assert to be in charge of our communities. So as this chapter closes, I leave you with a choice. The story of a doctor who fought back, survived a taser, and won in court will entertain you. Or you can see yourself in this story. You can see your family, your neighbors, your future. Because one day it won't be me. It might be you. And when that day comes, I hope you'll remember this. Justice does not begin with charges or lawsuits. It begins when one individual refuses to remain silent. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. So don't just listen. Act, share, speak. Demand accountability in your neighborhood, your board, your leaders, because we will continue to live under the same broken system if we do not demand better. And I promise you this, I didn't survive that night. I didn't endure the weight of federal charges and a $5 million battle just to have my story end in silence. With you, this is the end, with what you choose to do next.